I think we need to start gathering together and really looking at how we can put forward best practices so that we are presenting alternatives to really good alternatives and elevating good marriages, right? We need to see more of that in our media and so forth.
Dr. Jennifer Bowens. It's so good to see you on video. Having met in person in Washington not too long ago, it's lovely to talk to you. Now, for those of you who are tuning in who don't realise, Jennifer is of course the director of the Centre of Family Research for the Family Research Council. Now, perhaps we can start, Jennifer. Those two terms sound a little bit synonymous to me. So, what's the Centre for Family Research at the Family Research Council? What's going on there?
Yeah, so I direct the Center for Family Studies, and basically what I cover, uh, it kind of expanded actually because of my background. So originally I was supposed to be focused on the marriage issue and um, primarily children who are going through the transgender procedures, and we were developing policies to protect kids from those policies or from practices rather. And because I have a background in mental health, and we were seeing more bad practices coming down the pipeline from the mental health field, we decided to let my policy issue set expand a little bit since I had this kind of unique um, background. And also, there aren't very many people touching the mental health topic. So that was sort of the impetus for me expanding the issue sets that Family Research Council doesn't typically address.
So the broader Family Research Council, tell us a bit about that.
Family Research Council was devised in the 1980s, 1984 actually, with Dr. James Dobson, if you're familiar with him. He's a psychologist and wanted to address some of the family issues that were happening in the US and to lobby for good family policy. So that's kind of our genesis, but over time our issues have morphed and changed. Obviously, still focused on the family, but given the fact that our world is changing, we had to pivot with the issues that we all face in the day. So right now, what we're dealing with is mostly international religious freedom, domestic religious freedom. We deal with the life issue. So we
Mm.
are very much about protecting life from from the womb to death, cradle to grave, actually pre-cradle. So that's those are, and then of course the issue sets that I work on as well.
And it's because of the issue sets that you work on that I'm so interested in talking to you, of course, because the 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 perception of governments and other people in the media is that, well, it doesn't really matter what family you grow up in. Everything's up to individual own choices. Well, actually, statistically, it does matter, because if you're looking at mental health outcomes for children, actually there are some models are better than others, and oddly enough, the kind of growing up with your biological mum and dad in a married relationship thing is the one that comes out significantly on top. And so from that point of view, it's. I wonder why, in your opinion, do we seem so much to be in an environment where, even though that kind of statistically seems the right thing to talk about, there's a massive reluctance to talk about it.
Well, I think that um, I mean this is broad brush, of course, but I think we have prized individual freedom in the sense of it not really being freedom, but it's the way it's been defined is I can do whatever I want, and my truth matters more than other, you know, little t truths seem to matter more than big T truths, and that creates a lot of problems because what happens when your little t truth interferes or bumps up against my truth, and so people are trying to construct a reality based on their, ever elusive and changing reality. And we're finding it just doesn't work. Um, when going back to the family, when you look at how the family is constructed, it's a divine design and it works within a divine design. But when people start saying, I'm a woman that I really feel like a man and vice versa, and
Mm,
or an
mm,
animal, or whatever the case may
mm,
be, then we
mm.
start changing those bigger truths. And what we see is the children are the ones who are impacted the most because then
Yeah,
they grew up
yeah,
without a clear sense
yeah,
and definition
yeah,
of
yeah,
what family looks like.
yeah,
And we see that play out sociologically as well.
yeah.
We see, so there's one metric called attachment or attachment theory, which is a really interesting theory. It's been going on since, or actually, some of the folks in the UK are the originators of that theory, and just observing the effects of children who were sent away from their families during World War II. And we've been tracking that concept of how a child attaches to their family, how and if it's secure or if there are other disruptions. And what we've seen, at least in the US, is a lot of the data is showing that from around the 90s onward, we're seeing a decline in the number of children who have experienced secure families. The outworkings of that are things like incarceration, um, having a difficulty maintaining employment, having difficulty in relationships, and domestic violence and all kinds of abuse. So these things really matter, and how we define and maintain family has huge implications for every society. Not everyone makes those connections, especially in the policy space. It's like, oh, well, we have this incarceration issue, so let's throw more money at that. And so on and so forth. But we never deal with the heart of the matter, which is the family and the breakdown of the family.
Yeah, yeah, yes, and you mentioned divine model, and I would agree with you being a Christian, but we've got tens of thousands of supporters. Most of them, quite frankly, are Christians, but we've got a lot of non-Christians and a lot of people from other faiths as well. We approach it from a secular evidence base, but then those of us who believe in the design model would say, well, obviously, if it's right, there will be evidence in secular society, and indeed there absolutely is. And it's funny because it's a current conversation in the UK. We had another report about boys being in crisis recently by our Centre for Social Justice, and we've spoken about that. And indeed, I've spoken with Erica Commissar about the whole attachment thing. We've had a report just very recently. A school readiness report in the UK, which shows that actually children coming into primary schools aren't ready anymore. Over a third of them don't know how to use the toilet. They don't know how to associate. They don't know how to form attachment bonds or to listen. It's almost like a production line of brokenness in society. The rate of crime is going up, commensurate with the rate of children born outside of wedlock, interestingly enough. And even just in the last couple of days, we've had one of our well-known national footballers who was captain of the England team give a talk saying that men are broken and men need help, and his solution is we need better teachers and better coaches, not more fathers, which is like, he starts off saying fathers aren't around, but the solution isn't, well, why don't we get fathers to stay around? It's almost like anything but. Why is that? Why is that the approach that our policymakers are taking? Anything but keeping families together.
And I think sometimes it goes along with a lot of the professions, that the medical and psychological professions, that we're so um, specialized that we only see our part of the puzzle, you know. And I think that this sort of, even the internal sort of bifurcation or fracturing that's within so many people is also played out in our larger society, where everything's kind of chopped up into bits in this holistic approach gets sidelined, I think, in many ways. And really, we need to be looking at it's really just simple things. Going back to, what's your family like? How connected were you? Do you have meals together? Do you feel secure? Do you feel like somebody has your back? Do you have someone to go to? These are basic things that if those rudimentary things fall apart, then you can imagine what a child growing up in that kind of insecurity is going to deal with as an adult. And I think sometimes it's just so hard for people to come back to these basic things. And instead it's well, if we could do this and that. And but it really gets back to your worldview and what do you believe, how society works? What do you believe about the meaning of life? And
Mm, mm.
I know these are deep topics.
Yeah, no, they very much are, and it's almost from our point of view, it's like marriage has been redefined in the UK a couple of times, the same as in the US. First, to take gender out of marriage, and secondly, to take permanence out of marriage by no fault divorce, and while that was going on, we had things like civil partnerships, so same-sex couples can get the same rights if they want to. But no, we kind of felt we've got to break this thing up, which kind of recognizes the thing that only one man and one woman can do. We've got to kind of stop that for some reason, and that's not allowed to be talked about anymore. And even in our schools and all sorts of other places, we don't seem to be able to talk about the thing which, just by evidence, factual evidence over long periods of time and multiple societies and multiple cultures, is the thing that brings about the best version of the next generation. And try as we might, we just can't get. And you're very fortunate in the US in many ways, some ways not so, but in many ways, just because you seem to have turned a page on things like the trans debate, which again, your expertise area, if you like. In the UK, we've still got our National Health Service only recently saying things like, oh, we mustn't use terms like midwife, because midwife assumes a gender role, and actually we don't believe in that. That's a social construct. And it's like, oh my goodness, this is our health service. What are you talking about? Now, tell me a little bit about, maybe it's too early for you to discern the impact, but you really have turned on that particular issue. You've turned a page in the US, haven't you?
Yeah, and I think the fortunate thing is, as the public in the US has become aware of the trans issue, and really, I think one of the ways that it's been allowed to proliferate has been in the shadows. So it's been promoted as a civil rights issue especially during the Biden years, but even before that, it's been posed as, we need to treat people well. Of course, every person has human dignity, that's not an issue. However, when you elevate it as I have a right to trans surgeries and all of this, then it becomes a whole other issue.
Absolutely.
So I think as the public has learned what has gone on and what these surgeries and hormones are all about, and that education has gone forward, I think it's helped for politicians and our current president to ride the wave of political outcry and to see so many young people suddenly diagnosed with gender dysphoria. I mean, my state alone, we're seeing a 230% increase in diagnosis over a 4-year period. I mean, that is just insanity. Any sociologist would be very interested in seeing numbers like this, and should be asking what is going on in our society. So, I'm very encouraged by the current tide. Um, that we can actually call a man and a woman now.
Yeah,
That's,
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, who knew that we would be
yeah,
excited about
yeah,
these
yeah.
simple things?
Now you're bringing out a book. I spoke to Miriam Grossman on a while ago now on her Lost in Transnation, which is a classic thumper of a book, and it's got lots of different chapters for everyone who might every parent who might be concerned about every aspect of this. You're bringing out a book as well, aren't you, on this topic? Tell me a little bit about that and when it's going to be available.
Yeah, now, and I know your audience is primarily, you have lots of different backgrounds, but one thing that I have found as a trauma clinician is that over the years we used to just treat trauma as a psychological issue, and then we kind of realized that trauma isn't just a psychological issue; it's also a physical issue. And then, as we progress, people have acknowledged a spiritual component to trauma. And, and there are various ways that people have tried to intervene using different spiritual practices. Um, and and so what I do with, and my co-author do, Walt Heyer, what we do with this book is we really want to bring in that full um, understanding of the human person, that we are
Mm.
spirit, soul, and body. And
Mind, body, and soul. That's right.
yeah, and maybe not everyone
Mm.
agrees with that approach, but I'm coming from the background that I'm coming from with
Mm.
the
Mm.
trauma understanding and
Yeah. Yeah.
research as well. And so we wanted to bring that, first of all, that holistic understanding of the human person to the table. And we basically wrote this as a book that you could almost use as a manual, and you can if you're interested in understanding the history or the science behind the trans movement, then you can look at those chapters. Or if you're a psychologist and you want to look at what are they thinking about the gender dysphoria diagnosis, then there's information on that. And we talk about attachment, and we talk about the needs of those who are going through a detransition process. What are they going to need, from attachment to very practical things like name changes and all of that process. So we think it's going to be kind of a unique fit, and we're so grateful for all of the people like Miriam Grossman who are making a contribution to an area that you know if you're in this country, and certainly I'm sure in yours, that you're really putting your license and your professional reputation on the line.
Absolutely, and it's good that you're tying those three elements together because a lot of people are looking for that. And Miriam was purely medical, clinical, and didn't really bring in that third element. So that's a real build on that. And it's interesting. Something you said was not just mental trauma, but physical trauma. And I'm trying to remember who wrote the book, "The Body Keeps the Score."
Bessel van der Kolk.
Right, because that had a massive impact upon me. That book, it really, much more so than I ever thought it would do. Just reading it, and it was interesting because I think in Abigail Schreier's recent book, Bad Therapy, she kind of writes that book off with one line, and I like the rest of Abigail Schreier's books. So basically, saying for listeners who don't realize, Abigail Schreier was making the point that we're pathologizing a lot of normal emotions, and normalizing a lot of pathological emotions, which is completely the wrong way round, you know. But she also wrote off this book, which said, look, early childhood trauma can significantly impact your life and trap you in a different life to the one than you should be living. And actually, you can get people out of that cage. And it really had a massive impact upon me because you think, wow. And it's almost like this idea of so-called conversion therapy, you know. So in the UK, right, and you'll probably be aware of this, but our therapeutic organizations have reached an informal agreement that they will not provide therapy to anybody who wants to has what they call unwanted same-sex attractions or unwanted, you know, kind of trans tendencies or something else. Like, they will not provide therapy. Whereas the evidence, actually, there's a lot of evidence to say, well, these things are very closely linked to early childhood trauma. And so it's not necessarily a choice, but it is linked to early childhood trauma. And actually, if you can resolve the trauma, you free people from a lot of things they don't want to be captivated by. And there are so many people these days who are coming out of it and changing their mind and saying, I was down a blind alley and it was awful and I'm so grateful not to be there anymore. That doesn't, great, we live in a liberal democracy, some people can do that. But also, we live in a liberal democracy, some people can come out of it if they want to too. So talk to us a little bit about those things.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up because this is, even in our country, even as we're seeing the tide change on the transgender issue, at the same time, we also have those conversion therapy bans, which I think I don't like the term conversion therapy
Yeah.
because
It's an emotive term, purposefully done. Yeah.
yeah, and the reality is we already have laws on the books against torture, which is
Yeah.
conversion
Yeah.
therapy denotes
Yeah.
a type of torture.
Yeah.
And if anybody's doing that, they should go to jail.
Yeah.
Plain and
Yeah.
simple.
Yeah.
But to be able to conduct a proper assessment, to ask questions, um, that's just called good practice. And and there is a reality to the fact that kids who've been abused um, can engage in like a repetition compulsion so that they are motivated to repeat the trauma, which may sound terrible to someone who's not experienced trauma or is familiar with it, but there can be an attempt to redo and get mastery in a sense over that horrific event. And it's a normal psychological process when you've had that experience. That can be a very normal reaction. And if I'm not allowed to engage with my client and find out what's really going on with them, and especially when they want help on that area, you know, that's malpractice. And so this ban is, would say it as a counseling ban, is is actually promoting malpractice in my view. You know, I think at least in the US, a lot of politicians don't understand the depth of what goes on in the counseling profession, and that
Mm.
you have layers, systemic layers. You have certainly the bans that are at our state level, at yours, the national level, but we also have our code of ethics, which were changed, and my code of ethics was changed in 2008 to say that you will not, basically, you will not engage in anything that doesn't promote the transgender ideology.
So it's not. Ironically, it's not banning conversion therapy. It's actively endorsing it, but in the opposite direction, which is just the most bizarre thing of all, really.
Yes.
In your view, I mean, you've got a big field of study. You've talked to very bright and capable colleagues all day, every day. Where do we go from here? What's the route to? And again, we can't go backwards. Nobody wants to go backwards in time. But what's the route to just establishing a culture that recognizes growing up with your married mum and dad actually is a really good thing, and we want to promote that. And that doesn't mean that adults can't make their own choices in life, but we need to be very careful what we teach kids. In the same way as we talk to them about diet, actually, if people get overweight, we're not going to judge you or discriminate against you, but we are going to tell you about healthy food and healthy lifestyles, because that's just a good thing to do. We're not going to ignore them. So how do we get from where we are? How do we nudge towards that position?
Yeah, and I think you just hit on it. Compassion is our baseline, right? And I think, and I hear that from you and how you communicate about this issue. And I think we need more people who are, they marry truth and mercy. That we can't have true mercy without truth. If we don't speak that, then we're allowing people to to make choices. And I mean, it's still their choice, but we're not giving them the full picture of, hey, maybe this isn't the healthiest for you and for your future. Uh, So I think compassion is really that first step, and everything that we do comes from that place of wanting to see a person thrive in all areas of their life. Uh, I think legislatively, I'll just tell you, in the US, we have a number of, we have two Supreme Court cases that are on the docket. And these have huge implications for our country in terms of the transgender issue and our states being able to maintain banning those transgender procedures on minors. But that the states actually have the choice to make those laws. So that's at the Supreme Court right now. And then we also have a case that's uh, going to be coming up too on the counseling bans. So, legislatively, we have some good things going, but again, as good as these things are, we're looking at changing hearts and minds,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and we can legislate things, but if we never have the real, uh, if we never capture hearts and
Mm.
minds on this, we're going to be in the courts, again and again
Yep,
and again.
yep,
And
yep,
we still have to do that. I mean,
yep.
we have to work every avenue. You started off talking about the stats and sort of the outworkings of it, but a lot of times, especially if you look at the transgender issue, we may not have other studies that we can point to say, this is the better way to address gender dysphoria, or I would say identity distress. Um, and I think we need to start gathering together and really looking at how we can put forward best practices so that we are presenting alternatives to really good alternatives, and elevating good marriages, right? We need to see more of that in our media and so forth. I mean, there are many ways I think we can begin to raise awareness both at the public level and certainly at those who are providing services and are really the frontline folks who are promoting these kinds of ideologies.
Very much so. And I think, again, so you're talking about the courts and you're talking about legislation and all these other things, which are great. But at the end of the day, I think the thing on which your nation is founded, e pluribus unum, that out of many, one. And actually, it's going to come down to you and me and other people saying, well, no, I've listened to your logic. I've heard your rhetoric and your loud noise and your highly funded media campaigns, but no. And we just need to be brave enough, because it is a majority view, a whopping majority view, that these things are ridiculous. And with all due respect to your opinion and your desires, no. And that's kind of, I think, what we need to we encourage people and promote people, if you like, to be able to stand up and say that.
Yeah, Tony, and that's one of the reasons Walt and I wrote the book on the trans issue. Is we wanted people to be confident to take a stand, whether it's helping someone walk through the process to coming back to their true identity, or if it's just being able to talk to a neighbor and saying, we're not going to buy into a delusion. um, that we want people to feel confident to say that, and know that they have not only theologically or philosophically the right argument, but that they also have the science behind them as well.
Yeah, great. I think the future's very bright, especially with people like you around. Jennifer Bowens, Dr. Jennifer Bowens. Great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
You too, Tony. Thanks for having me.